In this video, I will show you how to knit a snowflake. You can download the pattern for free via the link in the description. It comes in 4 different variants. Here, variant 2 has not yet been blocked, and the same applies to variant 4. But I have blocked and stiffened variant 3, which I am showing in the end of the video. These are worked on 2.5mm needles in a yarn that runs around 200 meter per 50 grams. The first 3 are in mercerized cotton, and the last one is in glitter yarn. You can also choose to work in a thicker yarn, like here in a wool yarn that runs just over 100 meter per 50 grams. For comparison, these two are both variant 3, just in different yarn. This one I worked on 4mm needles and the other on 2.5mm needles. In this video I show how variant 1 is worked. But all variants have the same start, and the inner circle is worked according to the same chart. In the smallest of the variants, fewer rounds are worked in the chart. After the center chart, elements are worked according to different charts for each variant. You can use circular needles with the magic loop technique, or you can use 4 double-pointed needles, where the stitches are distributed on the 3 needles and you work with the last one. I will show it on circular needles, but also explain it for double-pointed needles along the way. I start by making a circular cast-on. By placing the yarn in my right palm and wrapping it once around my fingers. Then I hold the cast-on in my left hand and will now work alternating knit and purl into the circle. I hold the end with my right hand. I insert the needle into the circle from the front, catch the yarn and pull it through the circle. I have now worked a knit stitch. To make a purl stitch, I instead insert the needle into the circle from the back, catch the yarn in front and pull it through the circle. I've now worked 2 stitches and must work 12 in total. So I knit again into the circle and purl. And I continue like this until there are 12 stitches in total on the needle. I've now worked the 12 stitches in the circle and straightened them up by pulling the yarn end. So there is only a short strand between them, which is later pulled tight. The stitches are now distributed on the needles. On the circle needle, they are divided with 6 stitches on each needle. If you work on double-pointed needles, they are distributed with 4 stitches on each of the 3 needles. We are now ready to work the first round in the chart. The chart is repeated 6 times around, and on the first round each repeat is worked over 2 stitches. So I have 3 repeats on each needle, and on double pointed needles you have 2 repeats on each of the 3 needles. On the first round you work purl, knit, which is repeated all the way around. I can now tighten my circle a bit more. In variant 1, I have now finished working the chart for the center and must start working the elements along the edge. But I'll start by showing how the chart continues for the other variants. On the second round you work knit, yarn over, purl. The repeat that was previously 2 stitches now becomes 3 stitches, and I continue all the way around. There are now 9 stitches on each needle, and on each double-pointed needle there will be 6 stitches. On round 3 you work twice in each yarn over, which is the middle one of the 3 stitches in each repeat. The first stitch is purled, and in the yarn over I knit first but leave the yarn over on the needle, and then I bring the yarn to the front and purl the yarn over, so an increase has now been made in the yarn over. The last stitch in the repeat is knitted. Each of the repeats has now become 4 stitches, and I have 12 stitches on each needle. On double pointed needles there will be 8 stitches on each needle. I've now worked round 3, which is the last round in the center chart if you are making variant 2. But I'll also show the last 2 rounds that must be worked for variant 3 and 4. On round 4, the repeat is worked knit, purl, yarn over, knit, purl. Each repeat is now 5 stitches, and I have 15 stitches on each needle. On double pointed needles there are 10 stitches on each needle. On round 5 the repeat is worked purl, knit, knit, and purl in the yarn over, purl, knit. I've now finished working the center chart and have 18 stitches on each needle, 12 on each double pointed needle, and would be ready to knit variant 3 or 4. But I'm showing variant 1 here, and I start by moving the last stitch worked on round 1 back to the left needle. That's the stitch I will make a knitted cast on into for the first element. Each time stitches are to be cast on, I start by moving the last worked stitch over to the left needle. The chart is read from the arrow and shows that 3 stitches must be cast on. I cast on stitches with knitted cast on by knitting the stitch, but without taking it off the needle. Then I turn the stitch so the 2 needles point the same way, and place the stitch on the left needle. I've now cast on 1 stitch, and I do the same again. Knit the stitch and leave it on the needle, and place the new stitch on the left needle. You can choose to leave the right needle inside the stitch where it's ready to make the next knitted cast on. I've now cast on the 3 stitches and must then, according to the chart, bind off 2 stitches. All stitches are knitted through the back loop before being bound off. I knit the first stitch through the back loop, which means I knit in the back stitch leg instead of the front. And again I knit the next stitch through the back loop, so not in the front but in the back stitch leg. And then I bind off a stitch by pulling the first stitch over the just knitted stitch. I have now bound off 1 stitch. I need to bind off 2 stitches, so I knit the next stitch through the back loop, and again pull the first stitch over the new stitch. I must now cast on 3 stitches, so I start by placing the last worked stitch back on the left needle. And cast on 3 stitches with knitted cast on in the same way as before. 1, 2, 3. Then I bind off 3 stitches through the back loop. One, two, 3. Again, I place the stitch back on the left needle to cast on 2 stitches. 1, 2. And first I bind off 2 stitches through the back loop, then I bind off the last stitch in the element, and finally I bind off 2 stitches in the circle. I've now worked the first of 6 elements and placed the last knitted stitch back on the left needle. So I'm ready to work the second element. And I continue like this until the last element. I've now made it all the way around and must bind off the last stitches in the 6th element. But this time there is only 1 stitch left in the circle. So I bind off the 1 stitch and then pull the yarn through a bit. Then I break the yarn and pull the yarn end all the way through. Finally, I thread a needle with the yarn end and weave in the yarn to close the hole between the first and last element. In the 3 other variants, 2 different elements are made. First you work the small element and bind off stitches in the circle, and then the large element is worked and stitches are bound off in the circle. So for each repeat, 2 different elements are worked. When you've made your snowflakes, you can finish them in different ways. Variant 1 here, I just dipped in water, pulled it into shape and laid it flat to dry, as it is so small that it can easily hold its shape. This one worked in wool yarn. I also just washed and laid it flat to dry. I intend to use it as a coaster for a cup. So it's fine for it to still be soft, as it just needs to lie flat on the table. But the last one I want to be able to hang up either in the window or on the tree. so I want to stiffen it to keep the shape. For that I use water-based glue mixed with water. It can be either craft glue or regular wood glue from the hardware store that dries clear. I've mixed a bit of wood glue with water until it becomes a thin liquid. Then I dip my snowflake in the mixture. And take it up again and squeeze the liquid out of it. Finally, I use a piece of an old dish towel or paper towel to squeeze out the last liquid. I've printed the template that comes with the pattern and placed it in a plastic sleeve. Under the template, you need a soft surface that you can stick pins into. It can be a piece of thick felt or a cardboard box or a foam mat. I straighten my snowflake a bit. And make sure all the elements are turned the right way. And then I start to place pins. First, I put a pin in the center of my snowflake and down through the center of the template. And then I stretch the largest element out in pairs opposite each other. I use the circles to make sure they are pulled out equally. And I do the same for all 6 large elements. Then I also place pins in the 6 small elements. And in this variant, I will also pin out the sides in each of the large elements. Finally, I straighten everything up and leave it to dry.